Hi, I am now reading chapter 12 of Carlota. The story about the Paiutes had been true after all. They attacked a ranch near the pueblo of Los Angeles, burned a house, and rode off to the desert with a large herd of cattle and some good horses. That was the news until a short time after the wedding, when Don Manuel Ibarra of El Nido sent word that he wanted to call upon us to offer his thanks for the charming hours he had spent at the baile. But my grandmother looked upon this as something else, something of far more importance than a polite visit. We were sitting in the courtyard drinking our morning chocolate when a vaquero from El Nido rode in with Don Manuel's note. My grandmother opened it with trembling fingers. She read the note twice. Then she looked up and smiled. And a smile so early in the morning, or at any time for that matter, was unusual for Doña Dolores. My father and I looked at each other and wondered. Doña Dolores then read the note to us and put it away in the sleeve of her dress. I am pleased to know, she said, that our Carlota made such a favorable impression upon Don Manuel. What makes you think that Don Manuel pays us a visit for that reason? My father said. It is the custom of Spain to make such a call. It is Spanish politeness that will bring him. Politeness, no doubt, Doña Dolores said, for Don Manuel is a gentleman of breeding, but he is also a gentleman of the finest perceptions. She paused to glance at my dusty boots, at my hair pushed up under the sombrero. He is also a gentleman of understanding. Don Manuel Ibarra of Rancho El Nido, my father said bluntly, as was his manner, is old enough to be Carlota's father. Upon second thought, he is old enough to be her grandfather. Doña Dolores snorted. Cigarillo smoke spurted from her nostrils. Sorry, we have a lot of meowing happening. We had a little incident yesterday in our house, and it caused a lot of bad feeling between cat and dogs. So there's a lot of meowing still and unhappiness. It will take a man of Don Manuel's years of long experience to manage your daughter, my grandmother said. Furthermore, an officer in the king's army who is accustomed to the deployment of troops in battle, of battles in all weather and in all circumstances. I will send Don Manuel a note in reply, my father said. I will send it today, now. But as for encouraging him as a suitor for Carlota's hand, that I refuse. Don Saturnino was faithful to his promise. Before noon, he sent off a vaquero with a message to Rancho El Nido. He sent off 2 vaqueros, in fact. The other vaquero carried a note to Don Cesar Peralta, requesting the cattle and horses he had lost in the race, and agreed to deliver. Don Cesar answered the note. Toward the end of the week, his vaqueros brought in 300 cattle, part steers and part cows, and 12 horses. Of the horses, one was a fine breeding mare. Don Saturnino decided to turn the cattle out to pasture without changing the brands, but the horses were more valuable, especially the mare. We'll make a brand that will fit Peralta's circle, my father said. A small Z, smaller than the one we use. Our blacksmith worked through the morning and made a brand that was half the size of my palm. We tried the iron cold and were satisfied with that it would fit the Peralta circle nicely. I never helped brand cattle, but I always helped with the horses because we marked only those we valued. We did the branding in the small corral, which was near the hitching rack and the big gate. It was late afternoon. There was a breeze from the sea, but it was still hot on the mesa, and the dust the horses were kicking up stung my eyes. I pulled the bandana up over my nose, and that helped me to breathe. I was sweating and thinking how good it would be when we finished with the branding, and I could ride down to the stream and bathe in the cool water. I heard a voice behind me. My father had tied the breeding mare Cesar Peralta had sent. I am sure he sent the mare because he knew that I would be pleased with her, and I had just lifted the hot branding iron from the fire and was taking a few short steps to where the mare lay when I heard the voice. I didn't know who it was, nor did I care, but when I heard the voice again, I looked up. It was Manuel Ibarra from El Nido, and he was leaning on the top bar of the corral watching me. The iron was cherry red, so I didn't stop to wave a greeting to him. I took a careful sight with the brand, aimed at the small Z at the center of the Peralta circle over the slash mark, pressed it down firmly, and counted 3 seconds as the hair sizzled and smelled strong. The mare staggered when Don Saturnino released her, and then began to gallop around the corral. Our brand looked handsome on her flank. She would be the mother of many fine colts, I thought, and I gave her the name Gavilan Azul, blue hawk, because she had a bright hawk-like look in her eyes, and her coat was of a bluish cast. I waited for my father, and we went over to speak to Don Manuel. He looked fresh and handsome, as if he hadn't ridden for 2 leagues over a dusty trail. He wore an officer's uniform, blue with scarlet edgings, and on his chest were 5 medals, each polished and bright. I hadn't noticed when we were dancing together at the baile that he had a deep scar on his cheek. It gave him the look of a warrior. Ow. He glanced at me as if we had never met, and then I was aware suddenly that he didn't recognize me in my working clothes, because she looks like a boy, right? And she's all sweaty and dusty and dirty. So he's like thinking she's just some dude that works with the cattle, works with the horses. Not until I spoke did he take off his officer's cap and try to grin and make a low bow while standing on the bottom pole of the branding corral, which is difficult. We strolled into the courtyard where my grandmother joined us, and we all drank cool drinks made of cherimoya juice and honey. My grandmother kept telling Don Manuel nice things about me, how well I sewed, I had made the shirt I was wearing, and that I was a very good cook, and that I was a thoughtful granddaughter. While she was telling Don Manuel these nice things, he kept glancing at my boots and my grimy hands, and at the hair that was tucked up under my sombrero. When the 3 of them forgot about me and were talking together, I slipped away and washed my hands and face and put on a pink dress and a pair of new pink shoes. But when I returned, Don Manuel didn't notice me. He quickly drank his cherimoya juice, and when my grandmother asked him to stay to dinner, we were having quail and venison. He thanked her, but said that since he was still unfamiliar with the trail, he must leave before dark. No importa, it was of no importance that Don Manuel was going home before dinner. I had put on my pink dress and pink shoes mostly to please my grandmother. I wondered why a grown man like Don Manuel would go around showing off a chest covered with ribbons and medals. He was no sooner on his horse and moving off across the mesa than Doña Dolores said to my father, "Why was it necessary to brand the horses on this day of all days?" "Because the horses were in the corral and I wished to brand them before we put them out to pasture." My grandmother thought for a while. "Why was it necessary for Peralta to send the horses today?" she said suspiciously. Don Saturnino, who, as I have said, often spoke bluntly, said, "Don Cesar Peralta sent the horses today because I asked him to send them today." Does that answer your question? Then my grandmother threw up her hands and asked God to be a witness to the dastardly act of an ungrateful son. She also asked him to bear with me until somehow I learned to mend my errant ways. So she's getting fixed up with this old man, and she is not really a willing party to that. That happened a lot in the olden days. All right, we will read the next chapter.